Neon lights buzzed above polished cars and polished lives, yet in the far corner near a cracked concrete divider, a young woman in a slightly wrinkled uniform sat on the cold ground like the world had forgotten to notice her. Her shoulders shook violently, but no one stopped. People walked past her like she was just another shadow that didn't belong in the picture of a perfect evening, and he almost walked past her too, until something inside him refused. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echo Tellies if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one moment can change an entire life. Because this story is exactly about that kind of moment that it started earlier that evening with hope stitched tightly into nerves. Adrian Vale stood outside the upscale restaurant checking his reflection in his phone screen more times than he cared to admit. He wasn't someone used to blind dates. Life had made him practical, slightly reserved, and far more comfortable with spreadsheets than social surprises. But a friend had insisted, saying the woman he was about to meet wasn't ordinary, that she carried a rare kind of honesty the world was starving for. He didn't know what to expect. Only that she would be wearing a hospital support uniform, someone who worked long hours and had little time for fancy things. That detail alone had made him respect her already. Her name was Mira Qureshi, and she never made it to the table. Adrian first noticed something was wrong when he stepped out of the restaurant after waiting nearly 40 minutes. The polite excuses from staff had stopped making sense. The parking lot, which had once felt like just background noise, now felt like a stage where something painful was unfolding out of sight. That's when he saw her. A figure in a pale, slightly worn uniform sitting near a parked car, head lowered, hands covering her face as if trying to hide from the entire world. Her uniform was simple, clearly meant for hospital work, but it carried the kind of exhaustion that only long, unrecognized days could create. Adrian felt his chest tighten. Something about the way she sat there didn't look like an inconvenience or a bad mood. It looked like collapse. He approached slowly, unsure if he was intruding on grief. The closer he got, the more details became sharp. Tear tracks dried on her cheeks. A small ID card clipped to her pocket that kept swinging slightly with her uneven breathing. Her shoes worn at the edges from too many shifts, and then she looked up. Her eyes didn't just look sad. They looked shattered, like something had broken inside her that she was struggling to hold together. Adrian didn't speak at first. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't make things worse. But she recognized him. Not from familiarity, but from expectation, and that expectation fell apart instantly. She explained without structure, her voice trembling and breaking between pauses. She had been inside the restaurant earlier, sitting at a reserved table, waiting nervously for someone she had only seen through messages. She had worn her uniform straight from work because she didn't have time to go home and change. She had even tried to straighten it, to make herself look presentable, but people noticed. Whispers followed her. Eyes scanned her from head to toe. She heard laughter somewhere nearby, not loud enough to be obvious, but sharp enough to pierce confidence. And then the man she was supposed to meet arrived. He looked at her uniform. Not her face. Not her smile. Not the exhaustion she tried to hide, just the uniform, and then he left. No explanation that mattered. No conversation. Just a decision made in seconds that reduced her entire existence to what she wore. She said he didn't even sit down. He just turned away and walked out as if she was a mistake someone had booked by accident. That was the moment she couldn't hold herself together anymore. So she ended up outside in the parking lot, where the world was less crowded and the humiliation could breathe freely. Adrian stood there listening, something heavy forming in his chest. Not anger at her. Anger at how easily people could discard someone who worked in places that literally kept them alive. He looked at her uniform again, but this time he didn't see fabric. He saw long night shifts, patients being carried, exhaustion ignored, and a life built on service that demanded more than it gave back. She kept apologizing for ruining the evening she thought she had been invited into. That part hit him harder than anything else. She believed she was the problem. Adrian finally spoke gently, not to fix her, but to anchor her back into reality. He told her she wasn't the mistake. She was the only honest part of that entire evening. Something in her broke again, but differently this time. not collapse. Release. The parking lot felt quieter after that, as if even the noise of cars respected what was happening between them. Adrian stayed beside her on the cold ground, not because he had a plan, but because leaving felt impossible. He didn't try to rush her pain. He didn't try to offer shallow comfort. He simply stayed. Minutes stretched, then something unexpected happened. She started talking again, but this time not about humiliation. About her life. About how she had taken the job in the hospital support staff to pay for her younger brother's education. About how she often went home too tired to eat properly. About how she used to dream of studying further, but dreams had a way of shrinking when responsibility grew. Adrian listened like every word mattered. Because it did. The more she spoke, the more he realized something unsettling. People like her were everywhere, invisible until needed, then invisible again once the need was over. She wasn't just a rejected blind date. She was part of a world that rarely paused to respect quiet strength. As the evening deepened, the parking lot lights flickered slightly, casting soft shadows across her face. The initial storm inside her began to calm, replaced by exhaustion so deep it looked like surrender. Adrian made a decision without fully understanding why. He offered to walk her somewhere safer, somewhere she could breathe without feeling watched. She hesitated, unsure if kindness could still be trusted after what had just happened. But eventually she stood up, wiping her face, trying to regain dignity piece by piece. They walked slowly out of the parking lot, not as strangers anymore. Not as a date that failed. Something in between, fragile but real. Over the following days, Adrian couldn't forget her. Not in the romanticized way people often imagine, but in a deeper, more uncomfortable way. He couldn't forget the way she had been discarded so quickly, or how normal it seemed for others in that restaurant. He began asking questions about the systems around him, about hospital staffing, about how many people worked invisible jobs that kept everything functioning while being treated as disposable, and without realizing it, his life started shifting. He visited the hospital where she worked. Not to see her at first, but to understand her world. He saw how early mornings blurred into late nights. How staff in similar uniforms moved like quiet machines keeping chaos under control. How no one applauded them, but everyone depended on them, and slowly, admiration replaced pity. When Mira noticed him again weeks later, she was not in the parking lot anymore. She was inside the hospital cafeteria during a short break, surprised to see him standing awkwardly near the entrance, holding a small paper bag of food he had clearly overthought. She tried to apologize again for how things had ended that night, but Adrian stopped her gently. Not with words that excused anything, but with presence that made apology unnecessary. He told her he had been wrong about a lot of things in life, but not about her. For the first time, she didn't look like someone waiting to be judged. She looked like someone slowly remembering she deserved to exist without explanation. Weeks turned into months. Adrian didn't rush anything. He learned her schedule, her fatigue, her small victories. He learned that kindness wasn't loud. It was consistent. It was showing up even when nothing dramatic was happening. Mira, in return, began to heal in ways she didn't expect. Not because someone saved her, but because someone finally saw her without reducing her to what she wore. The man who had left her that night became irrelevant, almost like a distant shadow that no longer had weight. What mattered more was the realization that rejection based on appearance or status said nothing about worth, and everything about perception. One afternoon, months after that night in the parking lot, Mira stood outside the same restaurant again, this time not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone choosing herself. Adrian stood beside her, not as a rescuer, not as a replacement, but as someone who had learned that respect is the beginning of everything meaningful. She looked at him quietly, no longer broken, no longer apologizing for existing, and something unspoken passed between them, not urgency, not fantasy, but understanding. Before we reach the end of this story, take a moment to comment below just before the ending and share what you felt in your heart at this moment. Because stories like this deserve to be felt, not just heard. And if this story touched you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Echo Tellies for more emotional journeys that remind us how powerful kindness can be in a world that often forgets it. That night in the parking lot was supposed to be the end of something. Instead, it became the beginning of a life where someone finally stayed.